Wait a minute, I can be really cheap.
He can be really cheap.
because after how many years? 37 years or something? After something like, how long has it been from the beginning? 1976.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the maths on that?
37 years.
37 years. After 37 years of being in all of these movies, I walk down the street and nobody has the slightest idea who I am. So, at a thing like this, I normally bring this to so that you can relate. The odd thing is nobody, of course, knows how I looked inside this. And now they can see what really is on the outside, and they will put the two together. But forgive me if I use this for sort of character recognition. You can stand near me. Have you got one of the Emperor? You look like the so it's all right.
I don't know.
So, you know, it's been a tough job, but I'm very fond of this guy. So, it's how I can do it.
Oh, there you go.
That's a good try.
There he is.
So there we are. I don't see. Do you need these to record something?
You can just pick it up our natural projected voices.
Great. So,
On we go.
yes.
Yeah, Ian, it's 30 years since Return of the Jedi. What are your memories of shooting the throne scene with Luke, Vader, and the Emperor?
Yeah, there are many and vivid. That was done over an exciting week at Essen. And of course, as you know, the electric lightning was added later, so I didn't do that alone. And Mark, I'm sure he would tell you, is a Thomas Cooper fan. Some people in this room will know who that was. He was a wonderful English comic. He did magic tricks that always went wrong, and his great phrase was, just like that. And nothing would happen. And Mark occasionally, on the other side of the camera, would go just like that when I was doing this to him. So that is in the Bible then. But the great thing about that too, it was a gigantic set. And practically all of Palpatine's and the Emperor's sets were enormous. And I said, George, you're not going to realize this digitally, you're going to actually do it. He said, no, it's important for power people to have powerful offices, big chairs, big desks, and lots of space. And so as we went on, right through to the Sith, I was in these enormous rooms, and it does make you feel, quite sort of powerful. And the camera was usually very far down the end, and would come in closer and closer and closer and closer. So you did feel the power. And I was, I suppose, fortunate than some of the other actors who had to cope much more with their imaginations on the green and blue screen.
I remember you saying one day, or me pointing out, that you had more frocks than Palpatine and Amidala.
Yeah, I know. They just
Constant. He began to
stop
clothes horse for beautiful. Trisha Bigger's beautiful costumes.
Yes.
Why she never won an Oscar.
I know, she certainly should have. And she's a fellow Scot, so I have sentimental attachments to her as well as literal attachments to her. There's one great costume that she made, I remember particularly in Revenge of the Sith, which was just like the skin of a lizard. And it just felt suitably slimy. Probably your turn.
Yes.
I have two questions. First of all, to Ian. You played a lot of drama, like in theaters, Shakespeare, and what's the comparison between playing like for a science fiction movie and for a drama? And the other question is for both of you. In your opinion, who is like the best actor in the Star Wars movies you worked with?
Anthony Daniels, without question.
Self-evident.
Yeah, we dealt with that.
What was the first part? Drama.
There's a difference. There's a big difference, really. Although it's not too pretentious to say that the Star Wars saga is very like a Shakespearean saga. It's about the fall of a flawed hero. So it has those kind of connections. But the words are a little different, it has to be said. And of course, performing on stage is completely different from performing on film. even in a big extended movie like Star Wars, the camera comes in to photograph what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're saying. Whereas in the theatre, you're doing a little bit of what I'm doing, what we're doing now, projecting out to you, because I want to reach the two ladies at the back just as much as I want to. If I started to do that in film, it would be ridiculous. It wouldn't work. I would see, absolutely farcical. So that's the main difference.
And who was the most something actor?
Best actor in a Star Wars movie
That you've ever worked
that you worked with?
Joking apart.
Joking apart, I think it's difficult, but because it was the first film and because I was sort of in awe, it was Alec Guinness, which sounds like a really easy thing. But he brought to the set such a sense of calm professionalism in a complete, I'd never been in a film before. And one day he said to me, it's not normally like this. And he was quite shocked at the kind of strange way it was being filmed. I didn't know any better, but I thought it was a bit chaotic. And there were a lot of tensions because the Americans had a different way of doing things from the English, and it was mainly an English crew. But Alec was so hugely supportive on the set, off the set, and kind of reassured me that everything would be all right. And so it was. And you could learn a huge amount about professionalism just by watching him. Watching him be on time. Watching him come out of makeup on time. Knowing his lines. Simple things like that. But he was deeply charming and kind.
And he was, as you know, he was a great stage actor as well as a great movie actor. I think one of the regrets towards the end of his life was that he would primarily be remembered for Star Wars. He was quite happy to have done all the rest of it, because he had such an illustrious career in the theatre and indeed on film.
He was a bit, I have to say, hurt, I think genuinely hurt, or a word like that. Not angry, but he would have liked to have been remembered. I was watching Lawrence of Arabia the other day, a wonderful performance of the Sheikh. So many films, too many to think about. But some of us as actors, I think, how lucky have I been to be C-3PO? How lucky. A job I didn't want to do. A job, I refused the job interview. But something took over, a fate, a force, the force took over. And I'm here today in Essen, having made a very good living out of it and having made a very good number of good friends. And sometimes fate takes over, and it took over Alec's life and gave him more money than he'd ever had before, and gave him, I think, a lovely retirement. Not that I think he ever did retire, actually.
No.
But sometimes fate gives you things you didn't know you wanted. Fortunately, I'm fond of 3PO, which, fills in the gaps there. But I never expected to do this. Would you? No.
I really like working with the younger actors, by which I mean Ewan and Hayden and Natalie, and it was very hard for them because they did have all the CGI stuff to cope with, and they'd be fighting invisible enemies and so on. Now we're actors, we use our imaginations, we're used to that sort of thing. But George wasn't able to tell them quite often, not because he was withholding anything, he hadn't worked it out himself. Whether, for example, the enemy was just something you brush off or a matter of life and death. So they were constantly having to just sort of guess, really, how to respond to what they were receiving. And that's very difficult to do. And one of the most impressive things about Ewan and Hayden in the last movie was their sword fight, which was absolutely extraordinary. Now, it's pretty good on the screen, but of course it's cut into segments. And because we're so used to movie trickery, you could imagine that, it had been fixed in post, the great phrase, that it had been digitalized and digitally arranged. None of that was true. They really worked so hard to get the fight up to the standard that it was, and we watched it because they would run through the sequence over and over again as various bits of it were filmed. And I actually half-jokingly said that they should take that on the road and show to everybody what brilliant swordsmen they both became as a result.
It was like watching two ballet dancers.
Yes.
And regularly the crew applauded.
That's right. Or two Olympic champions. They were really that good.
I would like to ask you, since we are celebrating Return of the Jedi 30th anniversary, it's not usually said much about Richard Marquand, and I would like to know any specific memories you had of him directing you, and I would like to know as well, what do you think he brought to the film, to the saga?
Sure. I know that George asked him to do that film because he felt that Richard, as indeed he was, would be a very good director of actors. And George then admitted that that wasn't his forte. As he said then, he would do the geometry. But the problem about doing the geometry and working out technically what happened, that every now and again he had to say to Richard, I'm sorry, it can't be like that, because, etc., etc. Richard understood that, but in a sense, a relationship that had been designed to be productive in some ways was self-cancelling. So that was a kind of problem. But he was great with us actors. Anthony will tell you how he got on with him. I got on with him extremely well, particularly at the throne room scenes. He would just whisper the odd thing that's helpful now and again. But one day he did say to me something that seemed extraordinary at the time. He said, I have a tape here of Clive Rebel's voice. Many of you will know that he voiced the character of the Emperor in The Empire Strikes Back before anybody knew who I was. And I was slightly shocked by that, and I said, but I'm sort of doing this kind of voice, and no one said stop or anything. I presumed that was okay. And I said, anyway, if Clive Rebel had been playing the part, I know, having seen the face, which he knew nothing about, he would not be using, this is a very versatile actor too, he wouldn't be using the voice that he's using then. So, unless everyone thinks it's a terrible idea, can I go on doing it like I'm doing it? And nobody said stop. So I did, and you knew the rest. But that's a kind of pressure that Richard was underneath. I mean, he couldn't really say yes if he was in sole charge of the movie, like voice, great, carry on, all the rest of it. So there were always these sort of things that didn't quite fit. And I think that's why George has continued to direct the movies himself, the prequels and so on. It wasn't because, nobody can do it, far from it. He's very generous about the people he works with. But he felt in the end it would be very irritating for another director because he would have to say, no, you can't do this because this will happen later digitally, and of course all that stuff was in his head. But he was a fine director, and as you know, died much too early.
I'm remembering that he came subsequent to Irving Kirsch now. And Kirsch, sadly dead now, was just such a wild, wacky card, and maybe got a bit out of hand from time to time, and he was adorable and funny and inventive and whatever. But I think at that point George had to go, next time we need to contain it a bit, because of course Empire is most people's favourite movie, because it has tremendous soul in it, and continues the story into a midsection, which is difficult. But Kirsch did it, and Kirsch was much loved. Now I think it was difficult coming after that, and it was like having two directors, one that would say things and then go, and then George would kind of whisper in his ear and then he'd say the other thing, and it's like, oh, well, where? But as always, I was doing my own thing inside here, nobody bothers me particularly, so let me get on with it.
Yes, and by and large, they let me get on with it too. I mean, that's always been George's way. He casts you because he thinks you can do the job, and he lets you do the job.
Yes.
Yeah, we live in a fast time that people consume a film and they go on with their lives. And back in the days, it kept building and building. Do you think a phenomenon like this can happen again? And why did it keep building back then?
Phenomenons, almost, you see, immediately I'm thinking of Harry Potter and, similar things. What's the Hobbit thing?
Yeah, Lord of the Rings.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at remembering things. They have huge followings. Star Trek, huge followings. But there is some kind of magic that if we all knew, if you and I knew, we would be so rich and whatever. Because there was a magic that happened with the initial Star Wars, whether it was the time it came out. There was a happenstance, a piece of, I'm sure there's a German word for it, which means hitting the right moment at the right time is what to do with the Zeitgeist, which is German, of course. My first German of today. Pretty good, Zeitgeist? Yeah, okay. It hit a moment, it hit a chord. Also, what happened then, technically, is you started by saying it's been a very fast-growing world of techno stuff, if you will. What's happened between then is that the growth into videotape, out of videotape, onto discs, onto lasers, onto things. That has helped people be able to reabsorb the story over and over again in a way that they control. They don't have to wait till it comes back in the movie theatre. And that, I think, has served the storytelling purpose very well.
Time for one more question.
Guy in the nice t-shirt. It's a stormtrooper thing, isn't it? In Jedi, we were all in the forest, and they kept falling over. Stormtroopers. And I thought they were really stupid. Until I actually put on one of the helmets, and I promise you, the plastic was so cheap and awful. You know when you look down into an empty wine bottle to see if there's a bottle? It was like, you couldn't see, it's no wonder they bumped into things. So thank you for honouring the stormtroopers. What's your question?
Ian, before you played the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, you already had seen A New Hope and knew what Darth Vader's voice sounded like.
Yeah.
How was it to work with Dave Prost, and did you keep in mind that his voice would be overdubbed?
Well, I knew it was going to be James L. Jones, of course it was, and you knew that too by that time. And he's very tall, and inside that helmet, whoever it was, you wouldn't hear a word they would say. So, and he didn't have a particularly projected voice. So I used to sort of guess when he finished speaking. No one seemed to mind.
It's true. You do. You wouldn't. But you see. Remember, you see the finished, polished, edited production. You wouldn't believe the rubbish that's got taken out of there to make it. Which is why it's terrifying to do something live, because we could go berserk and make a complete ass. Obviously, asses of ourselves because we're not edited today. Do you see? When you see it, you have no idea that Mark Hamill is listening to somebody going. And Mark's keeping us straight. Ask Mark about it. Or I don't know what.
I know, and I came onto the set for it was one rehearsal, which I think they filmed, and then they did the first take. So I was expecting to hear. I knew Dave's voice was not going to be used because it hadn't been previous to movies. But I was expecting to hear it. I thought they might have put a mic there so that I would. But no, that's.
It's just when the fingers stop wagging.
That's right.
Right.
And of course, I learned his lines and sort of timed out what I thought James L. Jones would do with them, and responded accordingly. And of course, if I got the timing wrong, which I'm sure I did on a few occasions, once again the editing was sort of done.
Because you do, and again, this is something that I think particularly young people don't realise when they see a finished film, how much that editing has helped. I never knew what an editor did until I saw Star Wars, and we would shoot a scene that was rubbish. And then I'd see it, and it was perfect because 2 seconds from that angle, 3 seconds from that, and so on. And the editor weaves, and the editing on Star Wars was absolutely brilliant. Lynn Hale is hovering.
I know, I'm so sorry. We've got to get you into the next interview, and then we've got more people for you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.